Have you ever felt the weight of unseen eyes upon you, the icy grasp of dread creeping into your bones? I wish I could say that was just the culmination of a vivid imagination or a fleeting moment of paranoia. But for me, it was the terrifying reality of that November night in 2019, a night that forever altered my understanding of solitude and fear. My name is Ethan Miller, and I was just an ordinary guy working the graveyard shift at a distribution warehouse in the outskirts of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The hours were long and the nights were quiet, punctuated only by the hum of machinery and the occasional rustle of a restless rat. I had grown accustomed to the solitude, finding comfort in the stillness of the empty streets on my drive home. But that evening, as I navigated the winding roads through the dense forests of the countryside, an unsettling sensation began to gnaw at my gut. It started like any other night. I poured myself a cup of the stale coffee from the break room, exchanged tired smiles with my co-workers, and slipped into the cool embrace of my car. The night air felt thick, almost oppressive, as I turned the key in the ignition, the engine sputtering to life. I dismissed the chill that skittered down my spine, attributing it to the cold and the late hour, never suspecting that something far more sinister was lurking in the shadows, waiting to reveal itself. As I drove down the desolate highway, the world outside my window melted into a blur of darkness and trees. It was then that I noticed him, a figure walking along the side of the road. He was tall and thin, draped in a long dark coat, his head obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. There was something unsettling about his movements, a stiffness that seemed almost unnatural. I thought little of it at the time, assuming he was just another local making his way home. But as I continued down the road, a sense of dread settled over me. A few minutes later, I caught sight of him again, standing in the same spot, as if he had never moved. My heart raced as I accelerated past, dismissing it as a trick of the light, or perhaps fatigue playing games with my mind. Yet the feeling of being watched grew stronger, an insistent whisper curling around my thoughts, urging me to pay attention. Then, just as I tried to shake off the unease, I spotted the man once more, this time even closer to me, positioned by the roadside as if he had materialized out of thin air. Panic clawed at my chest. How was this possible? There were no side streets or paths that could have led him here. My instincts screamed at me to flee, and I pressed my foot down harder on the gas pedal, desperate to put distance between myself and this eerie specter. Finally, I veered off the main road, turning onto a dirt path leading to my home. I parked in front of my modest house, the gravel crunching underfoot as I stepped out. The silence enveloped me, thick and suffocating. No cars, no distant voices, just the heavy weight of night pressing down. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart, but the feeling of being watched lingered, a chilling reminder that I was not alone. As I reached for the door, a sudden noise made me freeze. Footsteps. They were soft but unmistakable, echoing in the stillness. My blood ran cold as I realized someone was behind me. My instincts screamed at me to turn, to look, to confront whatever was stalking me, but a deeper, primal fear held me in place. I couldn't look back. I wouldn't. Instead, I forced myself to move, climbing the steps to my porch with trembling legs. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, the sound of gravel shifting behind me growing louder, more insistent. I could feel the presence drawing nearer, as if it was breathing down my neck, waiting for me to make a mistake. Just as I finally unlocked the door and bolted inside, the footsteps ceased, leaving an unnerving silence in their wake. I stood there in the dark, my heart pounding in my ears, the weight of the world pressing down on me. Outside, everything appeared still, but an instinctual dread told me otherwise. I felt as though I was being watched, but by whom or what? The questions spiraled in my mind, tightening their grip on my sanity. Then my phone buzzed, tearing me from my thoughts. It was a text from my friend, Lucas, who lived nearby. "Dude, there's someone standing outside your place." "Who is that?" My heart skipped a beat as I read the message. I hesitated, the weight of dread crashing over me once again. What was happening? The walls of my home felt like they were closing in. I had to know. But as the night deepened, I realized that some truths are better left undiscovered. Sometimes the darkest shadows hide things we are not meant to see. But when night fell, something inexplicable happened. I stood frozen in the darkened living room, staring at my phone as my heart raced. Lucas's message felt like a shot of ice water, jolting me from the cocoon of my fear. My mind raced through possibilities, each more unnerving than the last. Had I really seen the figure by the roadside? Had I imagined the footsteps? And now, someone was watching me from the dark. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and turned to the window, peering through the slats of the blinds. The street outside was a shadowy expanse, illuminated only by the faint glow of the street lamp at the intersection. I could see my car parked in the driveway, but beyond that, there was nothing but darkness. I caught my breath, trying to steady my nerves. Lucas had a tendency to exaggerate, but there was a disturbing certainty in his words. I wondered if he was joking, but the fear gnawed at me, whispering that this was no mere prank. I texted back quickly, "What do you mean, are you sure?" My fingers trembled as I hit send, and I waited, the seconds stretching into an eternity. When the reply came, it was immediate. "Yeah, man, I just saw a guy standing there. He looks weird, like he's not supposed to be there. You need to check." The words sent a fresh wave of dread crashing over me. I felt trapped in a nightmare where reality twisted and contorted around me. I glanced toward the door, my mind battling with itself. I should call the police. I should tell Lucas to come over and check it out with me. But my instinct screamed that I needed to confront this myself. What if it was just someone lost or someone needing help? Taking a deep breath, I decided to step outside to reclaim my sense of control. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and opened the door slowly, the creaking hinges sounding like a warning. The air was colder than I remembered, biting at my skin as I stepped onto the porch. I squinted into the dark, searching, but there was nothing there, just the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was deafening, a stark reminder of my isolation. I took a step down the porch, the gravel crunching beneath my feet, and felt the weight of the night pressing down on me. I scanned the area, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing but shadows. Then out of the corner of my eye, I caught a movement, a flicker of something by the edge of the woods. My heart leapt into my throat. "Lucas!" I called out again, hoping against hope that he had come over. But there was no response, just the relentless whisper of the wind. I hesitated for a moment, torn between the instinct to flee and the urge to confront whatever was playing this twisted game with me. I forced myself to move closer to the tree line, the flashlight shaking in my grip. My breath quickened, and I could feel the heat of panic rising in my chest. Just as I reached the edge of the woods, I spotted a figure standing there, partially obscured by the branches. A tall silhouette in that same long coat, the brim of the hat casting shadows over its face. My stomach dropped. I was no longer imagining things. This was real. I could feel the pulse of fear racing through my veins. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The figure didn't move. It stood there, unmoving, as if waiting for something. I took a cautious step back, my instincts screaming at me to retreat, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. It was as if I were caught in a trance, compelled to understand this bizarre encounter. Suddenly, a voice broke through the silence, rough and gravelly. "Ethan?" It was Lucas, his figure emerging from the shadows behind me. "What are you doing out here?" I turned to him, relief flooding my senses. "I thought I saw someone," I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady, but the tremor betrayed my fear. "I thought you were joking." His eyes darted to the tree line, and I could see the unease settle over him. Dude, I'm not joking. I saw someone standing out here too. It wasn't you. No, I swear I just came out to check, I said, my voice rising in urgency. I gestured toward the woods. He's right there. Lucas followed my gaze, his expression shifting from confusion to horror as he took a step closer. What the hell? There's nothing there, man. Are you sure you're okay? Panic rose in my throat. No, I saw him. He was just standing there. As I said the words, I felt a strange compulsion to turn back to the woods. But when I looked again, the figure was gone, swallowed by the darkness. It was as if it had never been there at all. My heart raced, and I felt the cold sweat trickle down my back. Had I truly seen something, or was my mind playing tricks on me? Lucas looked at me, concern etched in his face. Ethan, we need to get inside. This isn't right. I nodded, the fear settling deep in my bones. Together, we retreated back to the safety of my home, locking the door behind us. The walls, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. What do you think it could be? Lucas asked as we settled into the living room, the dim light casting long shadows across the walls. I don't know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But I've never felt like this before. It's like something is watching us, waiting. Lucas's brow furrowed, and I could see the gears turning in his mind. Maybe it's someone playing a prank, or something worse. We should call the cops just in case. No, I said, shaking my head vehemently. What if it's not a person? What if it's something else? His eyes widened in disbelief. What are you talking about? You can't be serious. I don't know, man. But the way he looked, it felt wrong. I felt the weight of my own words, the impossibility of the situation crashing over me. We need to figure this out. But as the minutes ticked by, an ominous feeling settled over us. The shadows within the house seemed to stretch and twist, and every creak of the floorboards felt amplified, echoing the fear that had taken root in my chest. Lucas leaned forward, his voice low. We should talk to someone who knows about this stuff. Maybe there's a reason why all this is happening. I hesitated. Like who? Remember Sarah? She's into all that paranormal stuff. She might have some answers. My mind raced. Sarah had always been the quirky one, the friend who dabbled in the occult and believed in things most people dismissed. But now, as the weight of the evening pressed down on me, I realized that her insights might be our only hope. Okay, I agreed. Let's call her. As Lucas pulled out his phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening was just the beginning. The shadows were deepening, and something was stirring in the darkness, something that wanted to be found. And as I sat there, waiting for the call to connect, I knew that soon we would have to confront whatever was hidden within the veil of night. As I watched Lucas dial Sarah's number, the room felt increasingly suffocating, the air thick with tension. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The figure in the woods had left a mark on my psyche, a gnawing fear that clawed at the edges of my sanity. I glanced at the clock on the wall, the hands moving sluggishly as if time itself was hesitant to carry us forward. Come on, pick up, Lucas muttered, his brow furrowed with concern. I could see his grip tightening around the phone like it was a lifeline. As the call rang, my mind began to wander. I thought about the stories I'd heard growing up. Ghosts, strange happenings, and the whispers of those who'd vanished into the woods near my childhood home. My parents had dismissed them as mere tales, but the fear they instilled in me had lingered long after. I had tried to move past those childhood stories, to convince myself that they were just figments of imagination. But now, standing in the living room, lit by the flickering light of a single lamp, I felt those old fears creeping back, intertwining with the present. Ethan? Lucas's voice snapped me back to reality. I looked up to see his face pale as he held the phone away from his ear. She didn't answer. I thought she would be awake at this hour. My shoulders slumped. What now? I don't know. Do you think she's okay? Worry etched in his features. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. What if she's seen something too? The thought was absurd, yet the unsettling connection between Sarah and the strange occurrences felt undeniable. Lucas paced around the room, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. We should go check on her. If something's happening out there, we can't just sit here. The idea sent a fresh wave of anxiety crashing over me. The woods were one thing, but venturing out into the night, into the unknown, was another. What if it's a trap? What if whoever or whatever is out there is waiting for us to come closer? Then we need to be smart about it. Let's take my car and we can drive by her place. If we see anything strange, we'll call the cops, Lucas suggested, his determination shining through the fear. I hesitated, glancing toward the window where the darkness loomed. Okay, but let's be careful. Before long, we were outside again, the chill of the night wrapping around us like a shroud. I clutched the flashlight, its beam cutting through the inky blackness. As we approached Lucas's car, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was lingering just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. The drive to Sarah's house was filled with an oppressive silence, the hum of the engine, the only sound breaking the stillness. I could feel the tension between us, a shared understanding of the fear that gripped our hearts. But even as we drove, my mind wandered back to my childhood home and the stories that had haunted me then. My parents had forbidden me from going into the woods alone, warning me about the things that lurked beneath the surface, the animals, the potential dangers, and the tales of those who had never returned. Something clicked in my mind. Lucas, do you remember that story about the disappearances? The ones that happened every 10 years. He glanced at me, his brow knitting in confusion. What are you talking about? It happened in our town when we were kids. People would just vanish. It was always near the woods. My parents used to tell me stories to keep me from going out there. Lucas's face paled further. You think it's related? I don't know, but there's something about the timing, about the figure I saw. It feels like it's all connected somehow. He nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as he processed my words. We need to figure out what happened back then. Maybe it holds the key to what's going on now. As we pulled up to Sarah's house, the unease settled deeper in my gut. The porch light flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows across the yard. This feels wrong, I whispered, my voice almost drowned out by the rustling leaves. We'll be quick, just a knock on the door, and if she's not home, we go, Lucas said, trying to reassure me. We climbed out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath our feet, and walked toward the door. I raised my hand to knock, but before I could, the door swung open, revealing Sarah standing there, her expression a mixture of surprise and concern. Ethan? Lucas, what are you doing here? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Sarah, we saw something out by the woods. We were worried about you, Lucas said, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting the figure to appear behind him. Her eyes widened. You saw it too? What do you mean? I asked, my heart racing. I've been hearing things. Footsteps, whispers. I thought I was losing my mind. She stepped aside, allowing us to enter. I thought it was just me. As we stepped inside, the air felt charged, thick with unspoken fears. I noticed the candles flickering on her table, casting long shadows against the walls. There were books scattered across the floor, books about the paranormal, old legends and folklore. Sarah, you've been researching this. She nodded, biting her lip. I had a feeling something was coming. I didn't know what it was, but I felt it. I exchanged a glance with Lucas. What do you know? Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes darting to the window as if expecting someone to appear. There's a legend about a figure that appears every 10 years, right before something terrible happens. It's connected to the disappearances from years ago. Those who see it often end up... Her voice trailed off, a shadow crossing her face. End up what? I pressed, my stomach twisting. End up driven mad, or worse. A chill swept through me. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments of my childhood stories, the tales of the woods, the disappearances, the figure. Was it all real? Had I stepped into something far more sinister than I had ever imagined? Why didn't you tell us this before? Lucas demanded, his voice rising in urgency. I didn't think it was real, Sarah exclaimed, her voice cracking. But then I started hearing things, seeing things. I thought I was losing it. I didn't want to scare you guys. The tension in the room thickened, and I felt a wave of doubt wash over me. What if we're all just imagining this? What if it's just in our heads? But the weight of the moment pressed down on me, and I could feel the shadows stretching around us, threatening to consume everything. I glanced toward the window again, the darkness outside feeling like a living entity watching and waiting. What if the figure is tied to our past? I said suddenly, the thought crystallizing in my mind. What if it's drawn to us because of something we did? What do you mean? Lucas asked, his brow furrowing. Something we don't remember, something buried deep. What if our childhood fears are tied to this? As I spoke the words, a realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I remembered the summer I turned 12, the day I wandered into the woods, drawn by a voice I couldn't explain. I had lost track of time, lost track of everything, until my parents found me hours later, screaming and begging to go home. They never told me what they thought happened that day, but I remembered the fear in their eyes. Ethan, Lucas said, his voice low, you've never talked about that day. I know, I said, my voice trembling. But maybe it's time I did. As I began to recount the events of that fateful day, the shadows grew longer, closing in around us, and I realized that whatever haunted us was far more complex than I had ever imagined. Each revelation peeled back layers of my past, exposing hidden wounds that had festered for years. And as I shared my story, the air thickened with dread, the darkness outside pressing closer. Unbeknownst to us, the figure had already begun its approach, and we were unprepared for the terror that awaited us. The night was just beginning, and the horrors of the past were about to collide with the present in ways we could never have anticipated. As I stood in Sarah's living room, the air thick with unspoken fears and half-remembered stories, I felt the weight of my past pressing down on me. I had long buried the memories of that fateful day in the woods, but now they clawed their way back to the surface, demanding to be acknowledged. The flickering candlelight reflected the turmoil inside me, a dance of shadows that mirrored the chaos in my heart. Ethan, are you okay? Sarah's voice broke through my reverie, pulling me back to the present. Her eyes, wide with concern, searched mine for answers. I don't know, I stammered, my throat dry. I think I've been running from something I should have faced a long time ago. What happened that day? Lucas asked, his tone suddenly serious. I could see the determination in his eyes, the need to understand, to confront whatever darkness loomed over us. I took a deep breath, the room feeling suffocating as I began to recount the memories I had tried so hard to forget. It was the summer I turned 12. My parents had warned me not to go into the woods alone, but I didn't listen. There was a voice, whispers that called to me. I followed them deeper into the trees, and before I knew it, I was lost. As I spoke, I could feel the tension in the room tightening like a noose. Lucas and Sarah leaned in closer, their expressions a mix of concern and fascination. Hours passed. I don't know how long I wandered, but I remember the darkness closing in. I heard things, rustling in the bushes, branches snapping, and that whispering voice grew louder, more insistent. I swallowed, the memories flooding back. When my parents found me, I was curled up against a tree, shaking and screaming. They said I was gone for hours, but I couldn't tell them what had happened. I just wanted to go home. "Ethan," Sarah said softly, "do you think what you experienced is connected to the figure we saw?" "I don't know," I admitted, fear clutching at my heart. "But it feels like it's been waiting for me, like it's been watching all this time." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed outside, shattering the fragile door. We all jumped, the sound reverberating through the house. My heart raced as I glanced toward the window, the darkness outside stretching ominously. "Go check it out," Lucas urged, his voice steady despite the panic in his eyes. "We need to know if it's out there." "No!" Sarah exclaimed, grabbing my arm. "We can't go out there. It's too dangerous." "Staying here isn't safe either," Lucas shot back, his frustration surfacing. "We can't just sit and wait for it to come to us." A tense silence fell over us, each of us grappling with our own fears. I felt the urge to flee, to hide, but I knew deep down that facing whatever haunted us was the only way to break this cycle. "We have to confront it," I said finally, my voice trembling but resolute. "Whatever it is, we need to face it together." "Together," Lucas echoed, his expression softened as he turned to Sarah. "We can do this. We have to." Sarah looked between us, her resolve wavering. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "but we need to be smart. We can't just run into the darkness blindly." I nodded, the fear in my chest coiling tighter. "We'll stick together no matter what. If we see anything, we run back inside." With a collective breath, we moved toward the door, each step echoing with the weight of our decision. As I opened the door, the cool night air rushed in, carrying with it an unsettling stillness that sent shivers down my spine. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the darkness like a fragile lifeline. The world around us felt alive, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. The trees loomed like sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, whispering secrets I couldn't decipher. My heart pounded in my chest as we moved toward the edge of the woods, each step drawing us closer to the unknown. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I strained to listen, and sure enough, a faint rustling sound emanated from the trees, as if something was shifting in the shadows. My breath hitched in my throat, and I turned to Lucas, who looked equally unnerved. "Stay close," he warned, his eyes wide as he scanned the darkness. "Whatever it is, we're ready." As we approached the tree line, the rustling grew louder, more insistent. I felt a primal urge to turn back, to flee into the safety of the house, but I forced myself to stay rooted. We had come too far to turn back now. Suddenly, the figure emerged from the shadows, tall and indistinct, shrouded in darkness. My blood ran cold as I took a step back, the flashlight beam wavering as I struggled to keep it steady. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" The figure remained silent, its presence oppressive and suffocating. My heart raced as I felt an overwhelming wave of dread wash over me, as if the very air around us had thickened with malevolence. "Ethan, we can't just stand here," Lucas urged, his voice rising in panic. "We need to go." But something held me in place, a compulsion to confront whatever this was. "No, we need to understand what it wants," I shouted back, my determination flaring despite the fear that clawed at my insides. In that moment, the figure began to take shape, its features becoming clearer. And then I saw it, a face that mirrored my own, twisted in anguish, eyes hollow and dark, a mirror of my worst fears. "Ethan!" Sarah screamed, and the sound snapped me back to reality. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I realized that the figure was feeding off our fear, drawing strength from our dread and uncertainty. "Run!" I shouted, breaking the spell that held us. Together we turned and sprinted back towards the house, the darkness closing in around us, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. But as we reached the door, I glanced back one last time. The figure stood there watching us, its hollow eyes filled with an understanding that chilled me to the bone. It knew us. It had always known us. Just as we crossed the threshold, I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the night. We leaned against it, breathing heavily, hearts racing, but I knew this wasn't over. Whatever we had awakened was still out there, and it would stop at nothing to claim us. "Ethan, are you okay?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. I don't know," I admitted, the weight of the moment crashing over me. "But we need to figure out what it wants. We can't just run forever." Lucas nodded slowly, his expression serious. "Then let's find out the truth. Together." As the shadows swirled outside, I realized that the journey ahead would demand everything from us. We had to face our fears, confront the darkness of our past, and uncover the mystery that bound us to the figure lurking in the woods. The night was far from over, and the real confrontation was only just beginning. As we huddled in the dim light of Sarah's living room, my heart still raced from the encounter. The echoes of the figure's hollow gaze haunted me, its presence etched into my mind like a scar. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, but beneath that rush lay a heavy burden of fear and uncertainty. "Did you see its face?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It was me." Lucas's brow furrowed, his eyes searching mine for answers. "You think it's a manifestation of your fears, something connected to what happened in the woods?" "I don't know," I admitted, my thoughts spiraling, but it felt like it was trying to tell me something, like it was waiting for me to acknowledge it. Sarah leaned against the wall, her arms wrapped around herself. "What if it's tied to the woods? What if it's been waiting for you to go back?" The idea sent a shiver down my spine. The woods had always felt alive to me, a place of secrets and shadows, but now it felt like they were something far more sinister. "I don't think we can just ignore it," I said, my voice gaining strength. "If we want to move on, we have to confront it again." Lucas nodded slowly. "But how do we do that? What if it's even more powerful than before?" "Then we face it together," I replied, feeling a surge of resolve. "We've come this far, and I can't let it control me anymore." As we discussed our next steps, I noticed the tremor in Sarah's hands. "Are you okay?" I asked, concern lacing my voice. She took a deep breath, her gaze focused on the floor. I thought I was prepared for this, but seeing that thing, it felt like all my fears came rushing back. I've always felt like I was being watched, like there was something lurking in the shadows. "Me too," Lucas confessed, his voice low. "It's like we're all connected to this entity in some way. I could sense that this confrontation was affecting us all, leaving its marks on our hearts and minds. We need to share our fears," I urged. "Maybe that will help us understand what we're dealing with." The room fell silent as we each took a moment to reflect. I could see the struggle etched on Sarah's face as she finally spoke. "I've always been afraid of not being good enough, of failing those I care about. When I saw that figure, it felt like a reminder of every insecurity I've ever had." Lucas nodded, his expression soft. "For me, it's the fear of being alone. I've always worried that I'd lose everyone I love, and that figure, it felt like it was trying to pull us apart." As we shared our fears, it became clear that the figure had been feeding off our insecurities, our doubts. It thrived in the darkness we carried within us. "If we want to defeat it," I said, "we have to confront the shadows in ourselves." With newfound determination, we devised a plan. We would return to the woods at dawn, armed with our shared vulnerabilities and the strength of our bond. Together, we would face whatever lay hidden in the depths of those trees. The night dragged on, the air thick with tension as we prepared for the inevitable confrontation. I could feel the weight of my past pressing down on me, but for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could break the cycle of fear that had haunted us for so long. As dawn began to break, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. We gathered our flashlights, each of us carrying not just the weight of our fears, but also the promise of solidarity. "Remember, we stick together no matter what," I reminded them, my voice steady. As we stepped outside, the world seemed eerily quiet. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows that danced across the ground. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. "Let's do this," I said, leading the way toward the woods. The trees loomed ahead, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. The air felt charged, as if we were crossing into another realm. I could hear the whispers again, but this time they felt less threatening, more like a call to face the truth. We ventured deeper into the woods, the light growing dimmer as we moved away from the path. The rustling of leaves surrounded us, and I could feel the weight of the entity's presence closing in. "Stay close," I urged, my heart pounding. When we reached the clearing where I had encountered the figure before, I stopped, scanning the area for any sign of it. "This is it," I said, my voice trembling. "This is where I found it." Suddenly, the figure emerged from the shadows, just as it had before. But this time, I stood my ground. "We're not afraid of you anymore," I shouted, my voice echoing through the clearing. The figure paused, its face shifting between anguish and understanding, as if it could sense the change within us. "I am you," it whispered, the voice resonating in my mind. "You cannot escape what you are." I felt a surge of emotions, the fear of my past colliding with the strength of my present. "We're not defined by our fears," I declared, my voice rising. "We are more than this darkness." As the words left my lips, a blinding light erupted from within us, illuminating the clearing. The figure recoiled, its form dissipating in the brilliance, the shadows that had clung to us for so long finally lifting. But as the light faded, I felt a lingering presence, a faint echo of the figure's anguish still whispering in the air. Though we had confronted it, I knew that the mystery wasn't fully resolved. There were still unanswered questions, remnants of fear that would take time to unravel. As we stood together, breathless and shaken, I turned to my friends. "We did it. But I feel like there's still something out there, something we haven't fully understood." Lucas nodded, a look of determination in his eyes. "We'll figure it out, together." Sarah looked at us, her expression a mix of relief and wariness. "And what about the next time? What if it comes back?" I took a deep breath, knowing that our journey was far from over. "Then we face it again. We keep facing it until it no longer holds power over us." As we began to make our way back, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had merely scratched the surface of something much deeper. The woods held secrets that were still waiting to be uncovered, and the shadows of our past would continue to linger. But one thing was certain: we had forged an unbreakable bond through our shared fears, and together we would face whatever came next. As we stepped back onto the path leading home, I glanced back at the woods one last time, the sun breaking through the trees, casting long shadows that danced behind us. And in that moment, I knew that while the darkness might always be there, we would always have the light of our friendship to guide us forward. The journey had just begun, and the mysteries of the woods were far from over. As we emerged from the shadows of the woods, the sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue across the landscape. The air, once thick with the weight of our fears, felt lighter now, but a lingering unease clung to us like a second skin. We had faced the figure, confronted the darkness within ourselves, and emerged victorious, or so I thought. Yet as we walked in silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter had only scratched the surface of something much deeper. My heart ached with the weight of unresolved questions, and I couldn't help but glance back at the dense tree line, wondering if the woods were truly finished with us. "Do you think it's really gone?" Sarah asked, her voice barely louder than a whisper. I opened my mouth to reassure her, but hesitated. The truth was, I didn't know. I think it's just waiting. It knows us now, and it understands our fears, I replied, my stomach knotting at the thought. Lucas walked beside me, his expression thoughtful. What if it's always been a part of us? Maybe we'll have to keep confronting it, no matter how many times it returns. The notion hung heavily in the air, a cycle of fear and confrontation, an endless loop of facing the darkness that seemed to dwell inside each of us. We can't let it control us, I said with determination, but even as I spoke, I felt a flicker of doubt. What if our battles only fed its power? As we reached the edge of the woods, the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched ominously behind us. I turned back one last time, my heart racing. The woods were alive with a whisper, an echo of our fears that seemed to beckon me closer. Was I ready to step back into that darkness? Let's promise each other that we'll always be there to face it, whatever it is, I said, trying to instill a sense of solidarity. They nodded in agreement, but the uncertainty lingered like a ghost at our backs. I felt a chill run down my spine as I caught a glimpse of movement between the trees, a fleeting shadow that vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The woods felt like a threshold, a portal between our past and the unknown. And even as we turned to leave, I could sense that this was not the end. We had defeated a manifestation of our fears today, but the woods still held secrets, and those secrets yearned to be unveiled. As we walked away, hand in hand, I felt the weight of the unknown settle over us like a cloak. The woods whispered promises of return, and I knew this journey was far from over. What awaited us in the darkness? Would we have the courage to face it again? With each step, I felt a pull, a beckoning to return, to unravel the mysteries that lay hidden beneath the surface. The journey had only begun, and like the shadows that danced behind us, the questions would continue to linger. What if the figure had merely been a harbinger of something greater? What if the fears we faced were just the beginning of a far more complex web of darkness? I turned back one last time, peering into the depths of the woods, half expecting the figure to emerge once more, but there was only silence, a void that felt both comforting and terrifying. As we continued homeward, I couldn't help but wonder if we had truly escaped, or if we were simply stepping into a deeper mystery, one that would forever intertwine our fates with the shadows of the woods. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Share with your friends so they can also embark on this mystery-filled adventure. And leave a comment below telling us your favorite part or what kind of ending you'd like to see in a future story.